Well, hello and welcome to another interesting session of Digital Money 2020. In this session, we have a panel discussion on the topic regulations versus revenues, making them work in tandem with each other. For this panel, please welcome Mr. Munish Shah, Senior Director of Deloitte, as the moderator. Joining him in conversation are Srinivasu MN, co-founder and director, BillDesk; Rishi Gupta, Managing Director and CEO, Fino; Manish Mahatme, Director, Amazon Pay India. With that, I pass on the proceedings now to Mr. Munish Shah.
Thank you so much, Amitabh. A warm welcome to all of you. And I look forward to hosting this event on digital money. So over the last decade, there's been actually no other industries as the financial services industry where digitalization and innovation has created such a huge disruption. This is likely to continue with the next few years as well. So banks and financial services traditionally have held monopoly over financial services and payment ecosystem for many years. And that has now been disrupted by digital innovators as well as new business models, which are based around online presence, merchant networks, and partnerships with large market players. So much so, this services providers, few of them actually have no aspirations to ever become a traditional bank. They are finding profitable niches in mining customer data and becoming a data-based business model. So I wanted to discuss the emerging areas of innovation in digital financial services space, the emerging role of regulations and profitable avenues to growth, and how do you make regulations and revenue models work together in tandem. We have a very esteemed panel of speakers along with us. And before I open the discussion to get perspective from our experts, I wanted to basically talk about three categories of drivers of innovations and collaboration in financial services space and how they are sort of driving the financial services ecosystem. On one hand, we have the demand side drivers, which are primarily customer led or emanating out of the unmet customer needs. Second category of drivers are supply-led drivers, where service providers and market players are pushing the envelope on digital innovation, and they are sort of creating their own demand. And then you have secular drivers around the regulatory push to bring in better transparency, speed, customer protection, security, as well as creating a financial services infrastructure, which is being set up and pushing the innovation agenda. Digitalization, of course, is fundamentally going to change the way transactions are carried out, both on the payment side, on the retail side, as well as obviously on the corporate side. And at the cutting edge of this is going to be the user experience. So the customer expects financial services, particularly payments, to be invisible, seamless, real time. But also we are going to see new value added services coming in this space, such as hyper personalization, real time cash management, new purchasing insights that customers and merchants would actually value alike. New players are providing value-added services in addition to traditional financial services. This actually opens up new revenue streams and hence probably a flexibility to look at a share of wallet from a customer's perspective, or maybe cross subsidizing or pollinating some of the other services and increasing the revenue streams. According to World Bank, actually, globally there are about 1.7 billion unbanked individuals even today. And this translates that fintechs and challenger banks will be central to integrate these people into global banking systems. The India story, of course, is also in the same stage, despite the fact that we today might have very low proportion of unbanked accounts. The operationalization, the penetration of financial services is extremely low. So these challenger banks or neo banks or fintechs in strategic partnerships with financial institutions, retailers, government sectors will help democratize financial services by providing basic financial services in sort of a fair, transparent way. On the other hand, you have the regulatory and supervisory authorities who are faced with additional challenges. That how do you draw a regulatory framework which achieves the right balance of promoting these value propositions, at the same time protecting the system from risks which are inherent to digitalization of financial services. Now, as the market transforms, we will witness a swing towards customer-centric factors such as simplified access, embedded financial services, and obviously higher focus on financial inclusion. But in order to match this rapid transformation, regulations will need to be overhauled in order to keep in line with the changing face of financial services. India has been sort of, from a regulator's perspective, always slightly ahead of the curve, and in some sense shaping and influencing the way the entire industry is transforming. And that is also going to be the heart of today's discussion. I think that open banking is going to come up with its own set of challenges. The customer actually owns the data, but this data is vested right now with financial services institutions. How do you open it with accredited third parties to create value propositions which are unique from a customer's perspective? I think that in summary, as the profitability and the profit pools come under pressure from traditional banking activities, we will see financial services turn to data monetization for revenue. So data streams will become much more valuable when they are granular, right? So if there are product level data, dimensional, which includes say location level data, and basically creating a data cooperation and ecosystem partnership, which will be critical to realize any gains, particularly from a customer's perspective. So with this, I'm looking forward to a very, very rich interactions with the panelists. And may I invite now Rishi Gupta to come and speak and give his opening remarks on the topic regulations versus revenues and how do you make them work in tandem. Over to you, Rishi.
Thank you, Manish. I think the topic is a very interesting one in terms of regulation and revenue. One always feels that if it's regulated business, there is hardly any revenue and you can't make money out of that business. I think no better than us who can really go into deep into this particular topic, because as payments bank, when we were conceptualized and when we started to roll, the general feeling in the market and was that it's a very regulated, restricted kind of a payments business. You're not allowed to lend. You can only take deposits up to a particular amount, and there is so much of digitization already happening in the country. So what is the niche a payments bank would bring in? And the regulation is actually curtail the dream of having a larger financial inclusion impact because of the restriction which it brought in. I'm happy to say that in 3 years post this, looking at the challenges on the regulation side, we started to focus ourselves more on the rural side, something which Manish also touched in terms of financial inclusion, the topic of the unbanked, underbanked segment. I think when you look at payments ecosystem and you look at regulation, obviously there are regulations which states that you can't charge, like a zero MDR is a recent regulation on the merchant acquiring. But having said that, in our payments bank business, when we look at regulation, we started to see what is allowed rather than what is not allowed. So the first premise where we started to focus ourselves was that what is allowed within the license, let's look at that. And once we complete that, then we'll see what next we have to do. Within 3 years, we became profitable, and by focusing ourselves on the rural segment, by focusing ourselves on the underbanked segment, by focusing on the physical and the digital needs of the customer. So the customer is very smart. Right now, the customer used to travel maybe to branches and ATM. We have seen a consumer's change in the behavior of a customer, moving away from branch to non-branch models, to from ATMs to non-ATMs, and coming to local network of merchants. We saw during COVID, it further accentuated it. So just to share in terms of our growth, in terms of transactions, we have grown by more than 60% in the last 1 year. Our merchant ecosystem has grown by more than 2 times. And on top of it, we on a monthly basis, we are profitable. So from a regulation point of view, I would say that if the regulation is restrictive and you are bound by this regulation, you'll have to find ways within the regulation where you can actually make it work. Having said that, credit has always been a challenge in payments bank, and we have tied up with some other NBFCs who can provide credit on our platform. But now the regulation is opening up. They have allowed payments bank to also start offering credit through a small finance bank license. So I would say the regulator in India, and Manish in his opening remark has said that also, that our regulator is way ahead of time and has been focusing on how do we make this model sustainable over a longer period of time. So in that period, looking at the consumer change, and I would say that if the consumer is ready to value your service and they see value in your service, I think you can charge the customer. Some companies, some fintechs choose not to charge. We know BillDesk has been one of the most profitable fintech companies in this ecosystem, and they have followed a model in which they charge the players in the ecosystem. So if the regulation is allowing it, and regulation has always been very open as far as pricing is concerned, it is upon the incumbents who want to charge or not charge So I would leave it at that, that the regulation is open. They never dictate in terms of the pricing. If you feel you give a lot of value to the customers and they want to pay you for that service, you make a revenue model out of it. BillDesk and Fino are two very good examples on this panel who are profitable companies. Over to you, Manish.
Thanks a lot, Rishi. I think very interesting opening remarks. I'll move on to you, Vasu, for your opening remarks, please.
Yes, thank you, Manish. On just the topic, I think I want to reflect on the irony of the heading of the topic itself. Regulator versus revenue. In any other context, if one were discussing this anywhere else in the world, or even if it talked of it as India, any other industry vertical, normally the discussion topic would be regulation impacting growth, impacting innovation, compressing margins. The peculiarity of the situation we all find ourselves in the payment industry is regulation versus revenue. It goes to the moot point of the business itself of being revenue, of impacting the revenues. I think Rishi has outlined some of the key aspects of how does a company deal with in a situation like this in his opening remark. I will focus in my opening remarks on a couple of aspects as to every industry has regulation, and it is a sign of the maturity of a industry, or the growing up of an industry when regulators wish to regulate. If the industry is not relevant or very small, invariably there is regulators don't take interest. So I think that's the big plus point when we say payments industry is getting regulated. It obviously has now a life and stature of its own. So that's the first part of it. And like with any regulation, there are going to be pluses and minuses in various formats, and people work within that. But within the payments industry, I think currently regulations of a nature such that it's like entering a boxing ring. The marketplace or the rest of the industry is the opponent, and you having to fight with one hand tied behind your back. It's a question of looking at, is there a fair way for the industry to grow or for the customers to be served? That to me is at the heart of the topic. Taking further on the analogy, yeah, sure, you can find a way to survive, win the round, or keep running around in circles to avoid getting crushed and finding a way to survive. All these are models people adapt depending on where they stand, right? But it doesn't take away from the fact that we are all fighting with one hand tied to the back. While we'll discuss, I guess, over the course of the panel, some of these aspects of it, I just wish to highlight 2 or 3 things. I think the most visible aspect of regulation of the payments industry in the marketplace has been that of the MDR. Zero MDR has been widely publicized. A lot of people understand context, and that's seen as the one key regulatory impact. What I want to highlight is it's just one of the key regulatory impacts for this business. There are many aspects of regulation, but I'm just looking at the points that impact. One has been zero MDR, but I think an equally other important aspect which is never discussed or rarely discussed is the licensing policy. If we look at what's happened in the payment industry and the various verticals that have got licensed, in recent years, where you take a PPI industry or a bill payment industry or the about to get licensed payment aggregator or the payment gateway business, look, what has licensing done to the industry is an important aspect to consider. For example, in the bill payment, which is known as BBPS, you have more licensed payment players than the banking industry has in terms of Indian private and public sector commercial banks. BBP has more bill payment license holders than banking industry players. More players than insurance industry has IRDA licensed players. More players than what mutual fund SEBI has licensed mutual fund. The fact that you have a licensing policy that broad bases it to such a large extent is another aspect which impacts how an industry can grow. The third aspect, of course, is the what I call the in a regulatory sense the monopolistic mandate equivalent. In recent times, in a that's a non-payment sense, the topic of a 30% charge by a Play Store attracted a lot of attention, has got a CCI intervention, and a lot of attention drawn to it. But within the payments industry, for example, within bill payments, we have a regulatory mandate to route transactions only a certain way, and where the charge, the equivalent of the Google 30% there, is almost a 40 to 60% charge that you're obliged to pay here of the revenue. So there are three aspects. So zero MDR has been visible, but the licensing policies and the monopolistic mandate of routing transactions in a certain way all have a significant impact on the revenue aspects. Over the course of the panel, of course, we can talk of what players should do to survive in such an environment. How can they kind of rework their business models? But with that, I'll pass it back to you, Manish.
Thanks a lot, Vasu. Manish, can we have opening remarks from you?
Sure. Thanks, Monish. I'm happy to be here and share my perspective. I'm just a couple of initial thoughts, and I'm going back to Vasu's statement on the title of the conversation. It uniquely mentions the regulation versus revenues. I think there's the revenue piece, there's the growth piece, and the profitability piece. I think that, and leaving aside profitability and growth, revenues, as we know, given the payment ecosystem and the different types of players that are, I mean, you could have from a processor to a end-to-end destination that is completely branded as a payments destination. I think the revenue models for each player end up being different. In some cases, it could be just a pure transactional revenue as some would look at. Then there are some other revenue streams, whether they are linked to the customer life cycle or credit decisioning. Some of these aspects we'll speak about later. But I think, and thus, with the fundamental question saying that, is regulation actually impacting any of these different revenue lines? I think the answer changes as Vasu mentioned, and there is a nuance to how it could impact each of these revenue lines. One could say that a MDR regulation impacts a direct transactional revenue, but there could be other regulation which could limit how you look at the customer base and try and upsell these customers to sort of higher value or higher order products, which could actually deliver more revenue over time. So I think it's a bit of a nuanced thing. I don't think that regulation is actually inherently against any specific business model or profitability end point, so as to speak. But I think it's a slightly nuanced thing. But the more important also, and I know Vasu touched upon it, is often if you look at the last 17-18 years in payments and financial services, there's often been a sort of an innovation cycle and followed by a regulatory cycle. And largely, if you go through these, it's tried to address two specific aspects. One is the customer protection piece, just to make sure that complicated products or fly-by-night operators don't sort of fleece customers and get away with it. So there's the customer protection and the redressal of grievances, etc. And then the second thing is around systemic risk. I think we've been very fortunate enough to have a regulator who's been participative, who's been very thoughtful and also has been able to look around the corners and has taken very measured steps in both these directions. So to your question, should we live without regulations? I think regulations are good. We are very, very early in customer adoption curves, depending on which cohort you look at, and there is a long way to go, and it's very important to develop trust in digital payments. So it's required, but how it could potentially impact the long-term profitability and the revenue pools for different players in the ecosystem is a bit of a nuanced argument that could differ depending on the player of the ecosystem you talk to. Back to you, Manish.
Thanks a lot, Manish, and thanks a lot to all of you for your opening remarks. Let me start with the questions, and for the audience, there is a chat bot which is available where you can post your questions. There are a few questions already here, and I will direct those questions to our panelists in a moment. But first question is for Rishi, is that given the economic situation at this point in time, what's your sense on the overall economic recovery, and what should payment companies, generally financial services companies, do at this point in time?
So if I look at the economic recovery, I would say it's been a very sharp recovery in the last quarter, and we see the data also coming out from a 23.6 to 7.5% dip in GDP. So very smart recovery which is there. As we know, we are focusing more on the rural and the lower income category of customers predominantly, and we have not seen any big impact of lockdown coming on that segment. Rural has been doing pretty well. The agri sector, if you see the GDP growth in agri is about 3.5 or 3.6 compared to a drop in the GDP growth in the first 6 months. So from that point of view, I think there has been a good recovery for companies who are focusing on the agri and agri supply chain kind of a business, and especially who are focusing on the rural segment of the business. We saw our remittance business go down because of the movement of people from urban to rural during the first phase of the lockdown. We have seen a recovery. We have come back to 80-90% of that level. Overall basis, we have seen a 50% jump in our transaction volumes from April to October in this year. And on the generally, in terms of what the payment companies need to focus on, I think they don't need to change any of their plans as such. We are seeing some of them getting into some other businesses related to lending and other options which are there, but that's more from the business model point of view, not because of the point of view of the economic drop and then recovery. So I would say we should just stay on course on what we were doing earlier. And we see that the overall basis, we were one of the beneficiaries. In fact, we coined COVID as creating opportunities in virus infected days. So it was a good period from a business point of view, those first few months as such. I would say that we should just stay on course. We don't need to change too much. The economy is coming back and will definitely help all the payment companies come back to the pre-COVID levels and even better. Because one big thing which companies have done very smartly is that they have been able to rationalize their costs to a large extent, and the economic value or the unit cost has come down drastically. So if we see the revenues coming back to the same levels with a lower unit cost, I'm sure we will see a different business model emerge in the next coming years to come.
Thanks a lot, Rishi. Vasu, what's your sense on this?
There's some parts that I agree with Rishi, and some maybe have a different point of view. But broadly, I think on terms of recovery, there is the broad macro data that's been published. Depending on the accuracy of it, the signals are for everybody to read, meaning there is a sharp recovery in that sense. But both anecdotally and let's say from just what we see some on the platform, I do think what this FY20 will end up doing, right? This 3-6 months can be aberrative in terms of there's a lockdown to various things. But I think what it does is it's brought sharply into focus for businesses that having an alternative channel, which is essentially digital, is a must. Right? The vulnerability of only physical has got kind of exposed. Therefore, businesses that have the ability to kind of open up the channel will all focus on it. So in that sense, it will be a big flip for the digital side of things. They may all follow different curves and different pace at which it will happen, but I think it's highlighted that. And at first pass, we'll see all the large organizations, whether it's FMCG or anybody else, accelerating their digital plans of how to create a channel for situations like these. Secondly, from a regulatory or government perspective, I think you always look for kind of silver linings to anything. And even though we're going through, so to speak, a downturn in terms of the world over, all governments will find, say, what do you look for and how do you kind of benefit from this to do something good for a country or economy as a whole. And I would think India will focus on the digital story to say that bring in more policies, more regulation, which helps the digital push. So I think that's the other thing that will happen. But what I think it does is twofold. One, just given the India structure and the kind of distribution of various things, of wealth to equality, everything else, my intuitive sense is this will, over a period of time, in the next 12-18 months, we'll see a higher consolidation of share with the larger players than the smaller. So to that extent, I am a little concerned what it does to the medium to small businesses and within the organized sector first before the unorganized sector. The unorganized sector there's going to be lack of data to kind of assess what it does, and each one has their own market. But if I had to just take a guess at it, for example, the last 4-5 months, if you talk of product e-commerce over the internet, I would guess that the market share of the largest two players, like a Flipkart, Amazon, would have grown higher than the rest of the industry. That would be my belief. That's one part. To the other part, which I said, which I might have a different point of view, there is published data now to say as the recovery has happened for the large corporates, especially the ones that are listed, the recovery of profits or growth in profits has been higher than that of the revenue for them, clearly indicating that they have been able to streamline either operations or costs, or whichever angle. But what we need to remember is one man's cost is somebody else's revenue. So to an extent, a large corporate has been able to squeeze their cost. It means somebody's revenue got reduced somewhere, and that impact it's nearly a zero sum. You can talk of the customer benefiting, but in a business to business cycle, at times like these, I think it does have an impact. It's natural. I just don't think in India. I think across the world there have been instances where corporates, especially the ones that are listed, who have to protect the bottom line to protect and kind of signal to the industry, have looked at how do you use this opportunity to do cost rationalization, optimization that may not have been best doable in a different environment, whether from political correctness perspective or how easy it will go down people. That has happened, and I do think that we'll see the impact playing out more for the medium and small over the next 12, 18, 24 months. So the last aspect is from what should players within financial services do. I agree with the point that Rishi's made that I don't think the need to change a model linked to COVID itself per se is not needed. But need to understand that there are it's a significant tailwind for digital and payments business just given the situation. It makes sense to shore up on capital. It makes sense to take a keen look at your product portfolio to say, are there ones that are not going to make it good time to cut and chop and prune if it's possible. But I definitely would not advocate a jump into lending saying that this seems to be the opportunity I want to go there. It's a far more complicated market, needs a far more skill. It's not a short-term opportunistic segment to exploit. And while I think that has been the biggest, the change that people have done to say we all want to get into lending because we're all sitting on some aspect of data that we think we can monetize. I do think that's a space to be carefully thought through by people. You need to think through 3-4 years of scalability before you jump into it.
Thanks a lot, Vasu. Yeah, thanks a lot, Vasu. Question for you, Manish, is that what are the likely trends that we've seen in customer behavior on the retail side, and what is the new definition of customer delight, customer loyalty? What are the trends that you're seeing there?
Sure, I think a couple of trends I think worthwhile mentioning, and Vasu touched upon it, and I can try and add some context based both from as looking at payment flows and volumes as well as what we hear from some of the key merchants, both from say in Amazon.in as well as some of the merchants that we provide payment services for. I think a couple of things. One is of course digital payment adoption as a share of total consumption has fundamentally changed, and it's just becoming I mean 3-4 years ago, and Vasu and I remember Vasu and I having these chats before. What does it take to move a 200 basis points payment mix shift? And that was a significant investment and time involved, and even with that it wasn't guaranteed. But that has just changed dramatically over the last few months, and it did not happen overnight just because of the sort of the lockdown, etc. It's just happened even post that, and that's not necessarily only at one particular point of consumption. This is happening at merchants at checkout. It is happening at merchants at the point of delivery. So digital adoption itself is dramatically changing. But there's also something very unique happening, and we've seen this at Amazon, where customers are shopping. A certain cohort of customers that used to shop pre-COVID in a large city is now shopping digitally and paying digitally from an alternate tier 2 and tier 3 destination. And this is something that, for example, Zomato also released a study where they said that a certain percentage of customers were actually ordering food from a tier 2, tier 3 city. I think it's a very unique thing that's happening at this time. It also gives you a signal that as some of the digital adoption and digital payment adoption happens in tier 2, tier 3, it's going to create a sort of a halo effect and contagion as they speak to others around. That adoption is also going to get impacted. So I think that piece is very interesting. The second piece is that customers are choosing different products based on context. So there's no fixed preference to say that I'm going to use this or this way to pay or some particular behavior. That behavior changes depending on context. So what you use for a payment at a checkout on an Amazon becomes very different when you actually choose to pay something. I think there are two sort of behaviors that I think we are seeing early signals of. A couple of things I think come to mind. I think the first is trust is going to be a very important aspect. As more of these cohorts start coming in, customers are, a large set of sort of so-called naive customer set is going to enter sort of the digital payments space, and how we manage that trust, and if somebody can come and if customers could get phished. Sorry, I think I accidentally went on mute. But customers can get phished, and a lot of the social engineering, etc., that happens. I think building trust as an ecosystem, and all those players will have to come together. The second aspect is just basic resilience of some of these payment systems. I think as things scaled, there were some signs of some cracks developing in some payment systems. And we were finding it difficult as an industry to meet that consumption demand and digital payments demand. I think so. I'm talking about some very basic things, but I think as that scale has come, some of these systems are beginning to creak a little bit, and I think that's something that I think as an industry we need to focus on. Basic things around availability, resilience, uptime, latency response rates at an overall sort of a network level. So I think those are some very basic things we need to start with.
Thanks, Manish. And I think let's move on to some of the questions which have come from the audience. And the first question is, and probably Rishi, if you could take this one, is that what has been the impact of the unstable regulatory environment on revenues in the digital payments industry? You spoke about that a bit, but some more color and on the ability for companies to build long-term business plans. So do you factor in regulatory disruption as one of the drivers as you make the business plans? How do you look at it?
No, very interesting question. In fact, we have always been a believer of the fact that if there has to be a regulator and your business is going to get regulated, it is better that it is regulated from day one than it gets regulated in year 2, year 5. And we have seen many companies who were non-regulated. When they came under regulation, the entire not only the business model but the way the organization works. And I'll give you my own example. When we were not a bank, we were a BC player, and then we converted into a payments bank. There are many nuances which comes up when you get into a regulated business. It's not about the business regulation, but also supervision, compliance, audit. There's a lot of things which comes into the play as a regulated entity. And if you have on top of it, from a non-regulated business, you come under regulation, and then the regulation is maturing over a period of time. And we have seen, especially in case of digital lending business, we have seen that there has been frequent changes on regulation, payment ecosystem, especially with regard to KYC and the Aadhaar, the usage of the UPI, the Aadhaar, not the UPI, but the Aadhaar payment systems for KYC. We have seen a flip-flop on account of that. And the business model then accordingly keeps on changing and makes it more difficult from the model point of view, as well as also to equip yourself to work around it. So if the more stable the regulation, the better you are prepared for it. And I would say that the companies have to, even if they are into a non-regulated business and they feel that they might get regulated at some point, they should start building up their ecosystem, their business model in a way that even if a regulation comes, they are prepared for it. Something like a company which is not listed, and if they want to get listed, They know what are the listing requirements, they know what are the governance, compliance requirements. So it's better for them, they start preparing for it much in advance than once they get listed. So preparation and planning is better, especially in businesses which are in financial services, because at some point of time, the regulation will definitely come. And if a regulation comes in the initial period, it's going to be quite unstable till it becomes mature enough.
Thanks a lot, Rishi. Next question for you, Vasu, is that in faster payments such as UPI, what MDR is sustainable for all players in the payment ecosystem? And what alternative sources of revenues you think can be explored?
The first part is when we look at what is sustainable, I think the two questions to address for whom. At least I believe that the entire principle, if you look at the intervention MDR, it hasn't happened by the regulator. One needs to be clear where the interventions come from. We've all kind of spoken about how the financial regulator has been very proactive, very mature, far-sighted. The financial regulator did not get in the MDR constraint, right? So it's coming more from a government and that is widely accepted. So when we look at what is sustainable, I have a very simple answer. If you look at from a merchant perspective who has a portfolio of costs, credit cards ranging at 2% to something at 0%, they will all figure a portfolio based on what costs are available. To an extent that merchants think a 2% cost on credit is acceptable to grow business, there's a threshold, at the ceiling at which they can take a cost. It's not that they'll want the entire portfolio to be 2%, but broadly, the range. What should be sustained for UPI? I think there are two questions. A majority of UPI transactions happen on a peer-to-peer money transfers, which are personal in nature, like you paying a friend a driver. If there is a way the central switch is able to distinguish between those friendly transfers versus business use cases and merchant use cases, it's possible to come to a reasonable paradigm, because neither the government nor the regulator is looking, I think as what Manish had said earlier, nobody is looking to say let a particular segment kind of be negatively impacted. It is just that when you have a huge coalesce of things that you don't know, you've got 2 billion transactions happening, of which possibly billion plus are all the small value payments happening between friends or whichever social payments, you need to have a different structure for those. So I think for UPI, the key lies in identifying and segregating those aspects.
Thanks a lot. And Manish, question for you is that what could possibly be alternative sources of revenues which we can look at exploring from a business model perspective? Basically, how can information be leveraged? Do you think that the time has come where data monetization will take up in India in a huge way?
Sure, of course. I mean, our view on the investment cycle is very widely spoken about. So we look at an investment in a 10-year time frame. So I want to be very humble in accepting that we may not know all revenues that may emerge maybe 7 years down the line. And we often say, show me a big enough business and definitely there'll be some way to make money out of it. But having said that, I think there's always the sort of the three-pronged, and this is very widely covered in a lot of case studies and media. There's the core transactional revenue that accrues from a sort of a payment transaction in a payments business. There is, in some cases, could have an allied business or a mothership, so as to say, and then there is what benefit accrues to that, purely caused by how the payment transaction enriches the relationship with that customer. And then the third is around what could you do based on the value of that customer. Either it is in terms of higher value or higher order financial services product. So you move up the chain from, say, a transactional need to a borrowing need to a savings need to a sort of a protection need. And that could allow you to accrue or build additional revenue streams. And then there is the piece around creating an ad network that could be consumption linked. And there are multiple different businesses, and depending on where you are and which part of the sort of the ecosystem you operate in. For us, I think primarily we see a lot of benefit to the Amazon relationship. Customers value that relationship, and the more number of times that we can engage the customer in whatever the customer does, it enriches and deepens that relationship. So there is a downstream behavioral impact where customers keep coming back to Amazon. I think that's one piece on the sort of the secondary side. Vasu's raising his hand and wants to say something. And then, of course, there's some assumptions we've made on what that customer life cycle looks like, and what products that we can upsell customers. We have a suite of products other than just the sort of basic UPI piece. We have a co-brand credit card that has seen some really exciting growth. We see customers adopting that and using that very deeply, with usage rates that are very healthy. Though that product, of course, is a much works like any other credit card. We have Amazon Pay Later, where customers can take a sort of a short-term credit, and we use different shopping signals and payment signals to actually underwrite and do a credit decision. So we have that built out in our investment thesis. And some of the newer revenues, and there are some basic, some really early tests that we are doing on enabling ads and creating sort of an ad network. Those are very early days, but we see there are definitely some promising signals there.
Thanks a lot, Manish. And I do have a note from the host as well that we have overshot the time. It's been really great interacting with all of you. Thanks a lot, Rishi. Thanks, Vasu. Thanks, Manish, for a very, very interesting session. And I think the short conclusion is that when all of us are here to make revenues, the regulator is also there to sort of make it enable. And let's hope that we are able to make it work in tandem to generate more value for economy, for ourselves, and for our customers as well. Thank you so much. Keep safe and stay healthy. Thanks.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you, Vasu. Thank you, Manish. Bye.
Thanks. Bye.
Thank you. Thanks all.
Well, thank you, Manish, for wrapping up in time and for a wonderful session. I also thank the other speakers for their time. We end this session with thanking our partners, Lyra, PhonePe, Payout, Visa, Freshworks, and AWS for making this possible. Goodbye, everybody. Joining for the next sessions. Stay safe.